Very good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Confabulating this evening. Our topic tonight is speaking across the divide. The Nazis tried to kill kindness. We fight against that. And we are extremely honored to be joined this evening by Holocaust educators, Noemie Lopian and Niemann, two people whose families are from very different sides of the Holocaust, but nevertheless who work together to educate people and share a really vital message. Noemie is a qualified GP who was born in Munich, but currently now lives in the UK. Her parents are both Holocaust survivors, and in 2016, she published the English edition of The Long Night, memoirs from her father, Dr. Ernst Bornstein, who survived imprisonment in several concentration and transfer camps throughout the Second World War. Derek is a freelance writer specialising in natural history, who's worked for The Guardian, RSPB, and Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education. In 2015, he wrote A Nazi in the Family after learning that his grandfather was an SS officer. And since then, he's been involved in Holocaust education, delivering a variety of talks and presentations. Noemie, Derek, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. It's a real honor to have you.
Thank you, Peter, on behalf of both of us. And I think it gives us special pleasure to be talking to historians, to know that what we are saying will have a resonance with you. I'd like to start tonight by going back to a talk that was being given at the beginning or just before the pandemic. And it was a talk that Noemie was unable to attend, so I was there on my own. There was another speaker and she was before me. And this was an elderly lady who was a Holocaust survivor. And this talk had a particular significance for the girls' school who heard it, because this was a Jewish girls' school. And what that lady told them of her experience distressed them greatly. And when it came to questions at the end, the first question was from an obviously upset teenage girl who said, what can we do to stop another Holocaust happening? And that survivor said something that I thought was quite profound. This, in a Jewish school, she said, seek out people who are not like you. Find people from different cultures, from different religions, different societies, and befriend them. Get to know them, get to understand them, get to understand their point of view, because that is how we prevent these things happening in the future. And in fact, this was something that a certain person had started 2 years before, because I was giving a talk about my grandfather at a synagogue. And at the end, a lady in the audience came up to me and said, I want us to speak together. And that lady was Noemie. And we've been speaking together ever since, to people like you, to schools, universities, synagogues, government departments, countries all around the world. It's beginning now with benefit of Zoom. We've been speaking in Australia, in North America. And so I will now hand over to Noemie to present one side of a story that belongs to both of us and belongs to the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek, for the most beautiful introduction. Hello, everybody. It is a great privilege to be able to speak to you and to share our stories, our thoughts, and why we think our stories are relevant to you today. We both say that this occurred from ordinary people to ordinary people. And we all belong to one race, and that's the human race. So it was the Nazis after the First World War, when they came slowly to power, who made the difference amongst the human race. And I feel that if we continue to do that, then we perpetuate Nazi ideology. It was them who made us different by using the arguments of morality ethnicity, religion, and nationality. It was very clever, really, making people feel good for their country and their people. And that meant to destroy another people. And of course, it wasn't only the Jewish people, but the majority was, as you all know, probably on this Zoom, of 6 million and 1.5 million children. But it was also gays, disabled, Roma, Sinti, anybody that they seemed to other, and they decided. And the danger that they could decide, of course, was because Hitler, who in the 1920s was only a fringe politician and laughed at and only had a 2% popularity, came to power in 1933. And with him coming to power, changed the laws. As you know, the famous Nuremberg laws in 1935. However, I grew up, as you heard in the introduction, I was actually born in France, but I grew up in Munich, Bavaria, and Germany, Hitler's seat in the Second World War, not knowing anything about this story. Of course, I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't know that either of my parents had endured what we know today is called the Holocaust. Without actually finding out my parents' stories, and I'll tell you soon how, I could not imagine in my wildest dreams what man was capable of doing to man. I don't think any human being of sound mind really can, but that might be wrong to say that, sound mind, because those perpetrators were of sound mind. So I grew up in Germany. My dad was a dentist, my mum a French lady, and I had a very happy childhood. I enjoyed my life in Munich, and Derek's heard it many times. I particularly, to this day, have a special penchant for Christmas. How could I not? The most magical time. Munich was transformed for me into fairyland tale, even the little area we lived in, not the town center. The local bakers, the windows were dressed in white and in look-alike snow. The biscuits were Christmas biscuits. There was a cheer in the air, the baubles. It was magical for a child, and I absolutely loved it. And my parents allowed me to love it. My dad, practicing as a dentist, came across many patients, and he formed a friendship with one particular lady. I always say it wasn't strictly kosher. And this lady was an elderly lady who was very lonely and widowed, had no family. And the strange thing is that even my mum, who's alive today, is very vague, or says she doesn't know what was with her family. I was asked, what did her family do in the war? Suffice it to say that we called her the same name as my maternal grandmother, Mimi. We adored her, she us. She taught us about the Catholic religion, and equally she accepted us as Jews. She was proudly patriotic, wearing, in Bavaria, you wear the Tracht, it's called, it's the national costume, and she proudly wore that. So I had no idea that my father had been through 7 labor and concentration camps and 5 transit camps over 4.5 years. I knew that he had written Die lange Nacht, but I had no idea what was in it. The reason we ended up in Munich was because my father was liberated by the Americans on the 30th of April, 1945, at the very picturesque Starnberger Lake. My mum is French, and she told me it took her a year to decide to marry my dad. It wasn't because she was unsure of my father. It was because she couldn't face, at the time, as a young woman living in Germany. I just accepted hearing this story. I never really wondered why. Only roughly now, about 10 or so years ago, did I find out that my mother, too, as a child of 10, was affected by Hitler's regime. She came from a town called Strasbourg, which at the outbreak of war, when she was 5, the inhabitants had to be evacuated from there. And in her case, they moved to the southwest of France, to a small town called Saint-Junien. And as the war progressed, so did the German presence. And her parents were advised by friends who had contact in the French underground and who worked for the French underground to send the children away. Her parents herself were witness to families disappearing overnight, children being taken from streets. And so they made this difficult decision to send my mum, Renee, who was 10 then, and her older sister, Helen, 13, and younger brother, Joey, who was 9, away to safety to Switzerland, and trusting them to the French underground. They didn't know the actual people that worked there. And they left in May 1944. They traveled across France, initially were hidden in a convent not far from Saint-Junien for 2 weeks. The nuns tried to convert Renee. She wouldn't have it. They threatened Renee with hell. She maintained her faith, quite remarkably, I think, and they carried on the journey, and more children joined in each stop. They stopped in Lyon, which was being bombarded by the Allies, and they had to hide underground for a few days there. And then they traveled to Annecy. They were told not to speak to any officials, and obviously they were wary of officials, which is unnatural, because when we see officials today, we feel they are protectors of our civilian society. In Renee's case, my mum, who was a civilian, but because she was born to Jewish faith, no choice of her own, she no longer was afforded that protection. And so Renee, actually, on this journey, she told me, hid in the toilets. She was just too frightened to meet anybody or to do a wrong step. When they reached Annecy, they were met by their group leader, who my mum remembers to this day very clearly, called Marianne Kahn. Marianne by then was a 22-year-old girl who had saved, besides Renee's group of 32 children, over 170 children by smuggling them across from France to Switzerland. So that would be to Geneva. Marianne was very warm when she met the children, and the children felt reassured by her warmth, by her smile, and by her words. She made them feel secure. It was a sunny day by then in June, and she took them to the lake of Annecy. If any of you have been, you know how beautiful it is, and if you haven't, I recommend you go. It's magnificent. And they saw the Alps across the lake, and even though they were the French Alps, they smelled and saw and envisaged safety in Switzerland. And Marianne showed them that they weren't too far from the Swiss border. And she told them, however, that they'd missed the train and they had to take a car, a van, a lorry, and it was hot. It was one of those vans that you might have seen in pictures, with very thick green canvas. And they had to huddle together, were told not to make any noises, and embarked on this journey. A few kilometers into the journey, the cars screeched to a halt. Even though they were told not to look out, one of the boys did peep out, and he announced that there's a car of German in front and also a lorry behind. And the Germans officers from the car in front stepped out and asked the responsible to step out. They bellowed, and the German Gestapo from behind stepped out with their guns and dogs to intimidate the group of children. And they asked, who's the responsible? Marianne owned up, and she said that those were the children of the railway workers in Lyon, and she was taking them to a summer camp for respite and also to make sure that they don't get bombed. So the Germans said, take us to this summer camp. And so she did, and they followed. And when they arrived, the woman in charge was already waiting on the doorstep, a burly sort of woman with her arms folded, shaking her head, saying she's not expecting this group of children. She was only expecting a group of boys, and these are mixed children, and she thinks they're Jewish children. The older children in Renee's group were taken immediately to Annemasse prison. Renee stayed in this building for a few hours, was questioned, and then the early hours of the following morning was taken to Annemasse prison with her siblings. In Annemasse, the prison, and I've seen it myself to this day, and it's fascinating to see, because it was like that then and it's like that today, was in the middle of a built-up town. It was visible in broad daylight to anyone, and you can go and see to yourself for yourself. And she was interrogated every day by Gestapo Maya. And I told you that Renee didn't want to live in Germany, and it was because of this Gestapo Maya that any man that Renee thought was Gestapo Maya's age, she transfixed his face onto that man, the uniform of Gestapo Maya onto that person, including the heavy boots, which she dreaded to hear. He had unnaturally piercing blue eyes, which she remembers clearly to this day, and she saw him from very close up, because when he interrogated Renee, by then 10, Helen 13, and Joey 9, the three of them were always asked together, that he held a gun to Renee's head, asking, "Are you Jewish? Where are you from? What is your parents' name? Where do they live?" Marianne had told them not to divulge their true identities, nor to give away their parents' addresses, as the Germans wanted to take the parents away, either shoot them or to the camps. As time passed, and Marianne went daily to work, the children didn't. Marianne one day came home from work, unrecognizable. My mum always makes this with her hands. I don't know if you can see me. So her head was twice the size, she says in her own words. Marianne had been beaten and tortured. And Marianne told the children to reveal their true identity, to say everything, to maintain her safety. I have to add that Marianne could have gone from the French underground, could have left prison and gone to safety herself more than once, but she refused. She said the parents had entrusted the children to her and she wasn't going to leave the children. Marianne was raped and tortured and shot in July 1944, not far away from Annemasse prison. Renee owes her life in part to Marianne. The other person I haven't mentioned was the Lord Mayor Jean de Faux. He was appointed Lord Mayor by Vichy France and had a very good relationship with the Gestapo. However, he knew that it was coming to, the Germans were losing the war by then, even though the Germans weren't recognizing it themselves. And he told the Germans he would help them to flee because it was difficult. Some of the railway lines were bombed and they couldn't make their escape easily. Equally, the children couldn't be sent to camps because of the bombing of the railway lines. So he said he would facilitate their escape if he entrusted the children to, if they entrusted the children to him. He had to sign a document. And I've seen that on the internet, to say that if they return, he has to return the children to the Gestapo. The grandson that I met of the Lord Mayor said he wasn't afraid of dying, but he was afraid to go to be tortured, and he crossed himself every time before having a meeting, but he did. And he saved Renee and the 32 children. He took them to the neighboring town of Bonne-sur-Menage and subsequently to Geneva, where Renee was reunited with her parents after having stayed 6 months later. Her parents survived the war, having gone in and out of hiding. My dad was in 7 labor and concentration camps. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're not all the very well-known ones. So there were many in Germany and Poland. Grünheide, Markstadt, Fünfteichen, Großrosen, Flossenbürg, Leonberg und Mühldorf. My dad was 17 in 1939 at the outbreak of war. Initially, he just says in his book, he was excited when he heard the aeroplane, but I think that excitement lasted a matter of seconds or minutes, like any youth hearing a change in town. The atmosphere and the climate changed quickly and dramatically when the Germans invaded Poland, and very early on, They wanted to shoot the Jews because they held them from my father's town, because they were held responsible for shooting one of their people. The other thing he suffered was he was taken to a practice sort of camp where they assembled in a large sort of barn-like area, and people were it was a very, very crowded area, and people were trampled on and beards were ripped out and beaten up. And that was the experiences frequent from 39 to 41. He went into hiding on the 25th of March 1941. He was meant to go into hiding, on that night, and refused. He was 19 then, and that was the night that the Germans came into his building and beat him out of the flat. And it was the last time he was to see his mother alive. I want to read you some passages, really, so that you hear my father's words, which are far more powerful than I will ever be able to say it in a summary. And it is describing when he's on a death march. How does a person feel when he sees his companion being shot the moment he stops walking and realizes he can barely walk himself? Of course, at first he carries on. He wants to live. He reaches for his companion's hand to support himself, but the companion is at the end of his strength, and he pushes the hand away. The weak one is left behind, but that one must have seen for oneself the lifeless face, the flickering eyes of a person about to confront his fate. The bullet strikes his neighbor, and soon he will also be struck. Who can say what such a person experiences whilst walking the final steps of his life? Who can describe what he feels and suffers in these moments? And what did I myself experience on this day? As chosen inmate, I had to carry the bread sack for the capo, and the last one in line, I had to march next to him and the SS man. The SS man shot all those who stopped, and the capo had to record their concentration camp numbers. I looked into the barrel of the gun before the bullet struck the neck of the tottering person, looked at the thin stream of blood that ran slowly as life departed the body. I observed the SS man and saw how he ate his sandwich with appetite whilst continuing to walk, despite his bloody deed. In the nearby fields, there were farmers sowing, and at one of the houses by the roadside, a woman was watering flowers. In this moment, a bullet pierced the head of a straggler. A small stream of blood ran down the temple. And all that happened in the midst of built-up fields and lovingly tended flower gardens. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Derek now.
Thank you, Noemie. There's one fundamental difference between our presentations. Noemie has no illustrations. Her father's story and her mother's story have to be told from memory because there are no photographs. They had nothing. As a contrast, my family had something like 550 photographs that record their comfortable, supposedly civilized life in Berlin and in other places before that. And I'm going to share a presentation with you in a minute. The first picture I show, I have to say, is probably the most dull-looking picture you'll ever see. But I think it's also the most thought-provoking. Because that first picture shows a single item from the company accounts. It's compiled by the company auditor. And the auditor is in an almost unique position of knowing everything about that company by necessity. The auditor lists costs, expenditure, and has to itemize everything and explain everything. You could argue that the auditor of a company knows more about that company and its workings than the chief executive. And now I'll show a slide that shows that specific item, an item that says so much in so few words. And this is it. The auditor is describing the closing down of a factory. He's describing the loss of 8,000 workers. The factory is in Lublin, in modern Poland. And he talks about there's a strange language here. Consideration of the results of the special action of the 3rd of November, 1943. If you're familiar with German and with Nazi terminology, you may know that the words special action in German are Sonderaktion, special operation. And this was always used as a euphemism for a massacre. And this accountant, this auditor, knows that 8,000 workers were taken out and shot on the 3rd of November 1943. This was part of the biggest massacre carried out by the Germans in the whole of the Second World War, when somewhere between 32,000 and 40,000 Jews were taken out into a forest and shot. And this auditor knows the number from one specific place, and he knows the date. Nobody in the general German population had any idea that this was happening. And this auditor was my grandfather. I grew up in Glasgow and just outside Glasgow, knowing nothing of this. This is a picture of me as a wee boy in my chair, my big brother, whose middle name was Carl, named after the grandfather who died before we were both born. My dad at the back was indeed German. His sister married a Scottish soldier after the war. And in the late 1950s, my dad was an illegal immigrant to Scotland, seeking a better life there. I would sometimes quiz him about his background, but it was so downright tedious that I didn't go very far. All he would say was that his father had fought in the First World War, and that after that, he'd been a bank official, a pen pusher. This was not the kind of thing to set any teenage boy's imagination alight. And I never asked him anything. But after his sister died in 2010, I was reading a book on Berlin at War by Roger Moorhouse, and I would recommend that book. And by then, my dad had actually told me that he'd spent the war in Berlin. I mentioned something in the book about life in Berlin, and incredibly, my dad not only remembered that, but added to it and started telling me more things about Berlin, things that were in that book. And I realized that he had an almost photographic memory of his childhood in Berlin between the ages of 10 and 11. But at that time, he told me nothing about his father, about his father's real role. And I only found that out at the age of 50 by accident. I also found all the photographs that were hidden from the rest of the family. Some of them had even been in a Jewish lady's cellar. So I'm going to go through my grandfather's life now and his family as well, and we can see the life of an otherwise ordinary man. A man who married his sweetheart from before the First World War in 1921. And here they are pictured round about their wedding day. It may have been their wedding day. My grandfather wearing his ribbons from the war. He fought in every significant battle in the First World War. At Mons, Marne, Ypres, the Somme. He was wounded at Passchendaele and became a prisoner of war. Perhaps after the war, returning to the shattered economy of Germany, the resentments began in him. But throughout the 1920s, there was no evidence of any political affiliation at a time when old soldiers tended, if they had any political interest, to join some of the right-wing organizations in Germany. My grandfather simply raised his family. They moved from the Pied Piper town of Hameln to the city of Dortmund, and here are pictured his two eldest children, my Aunt Anna, who my father would later join in Scotland, and a little brother Dieter. And he's taking photographs. He was a very keen photographer and a very good photographer as well. Look at the use of light here. He took photographs of the army when they came to the market square. And we see here, there's not a single swastika. So this is before Hitler comes to power. I know from German records that my grandfather joined the Nazi Party in September 1930, relatively early. And he took this photograph, he took 2-3 photographs of this stormtrooper parade through Dortmund. Dortmund, at that time, a communist hotbed, by no means favourable towards the Nazis. So my grandfather was not riding a popular wave. He was joining the Nazis out of personal conviction against opposition. I can date this photograph to the summer of 1933 because there's my dad. Hitler is in power, of course, as we all know. My grandfather, as well as being an auditor in civilian life, is also an official in the evenings for the Nazi Party. One of his roles is to knock on people's doors and canvass their political opinions. And if they didn't line up with those of the government, he was supposed to report them to the Gestapo. And we move forward now. Early 1935, my dad is now in his pram, and you can see that his two siblings are wearing the uniforms of the junior Hitler Youth. Already they're infected by Nazi ideology. And the man behind the camera is now in a position of financial difficulty. He's lost his job for whatever reason, we don't know why. He's run out of money. His friend tells him that he knows somebody who went to the same school as him in Hameln. And there, my father is introduced to Heinrich Himmler's deputy in the SS. My grandfather willingly signed up for the SS, left the family for 6 months, went to Bavaria. Here are 3 of his colleagues. The SS was quite small. This is the winter of 1935 to 36. The men were meant to show Bruderschaft. They were meant to socialize with each other. I know that my grandfather was socializing with at least 10 future commandants of concentration camps. One day, the arrival of what I think was possibly the commandant of Dachau, my grandfather took this photograph. You see this man on the left giving the Hitler salute. This man in the middle, I think, is Eicher, the man who invented the brutal discipline of concentration camps. My grandfather is standing in a guard's tower on the exact location of the visitor center of today's Dachau concentration camp. Initially, he was working as an auditor in an SS complex next door, initially. And we move forward now to, well, the family moved to Berlin. My grandfather's job moved to Berlin in late 1938. And they moved to an idyllic estate on the edge of the city near the forest of Grunewald. These are the 4 children, and they now include my Uncle Ecke in the middle, the only survivor of this group. This is New Year's Eve, 1938. The lady there is wearing a tiara with 1939 on it. It's a party, a New Year's Eve party. They're all totally drunk. The estate was built for the SS on Himmler's orders. So everyone, all the men in this photograph, are either SS officers or military police. They're having a great time. This is 7 weeks after Kristallnacht. And there is a dissonance throughout hundreds of my family photographs from Berlin. A dissonance exemplified by the fact that probably when this photograph was being taken, Noemie's father was being taken by the Gestapo into captivity. And this family and the estate they were on was somehow immune from everything that was happening all around them, immune from what was happening in the concentration camps, and also from the thousands of civilians in the city centre who were being bombed out or killed. Not a single person on this estate was killed or even wounded, not a single house destroyed. And this is typical of the family photographs. They're a loving, affectionate family, a family that are happy with their lot in life. The war has started when this photograph is taken. My father kept his father's occupation from me. When I found out at the age of 50 he was sliding into dementia, I was able to glean a little bit about his father's character. My dad said that his own father was a distant man. He remembered he would be driven to work by a chauffeur, and then he would go on business trips. And when he returned from business trips, he would be getting ready for another one, going to his factories. Otherwise, he would keep himself to himself, perhaps pottering in the garden, as he is here in the summer of 1944. And about that time, his eldest son, like everyone in his class, was taken out of school. School ended. They had to fight for Germany. Many of them joined the guns shooting at the Allied bombers coming over. And this is Dieter in his uniform. It sounds tough, but at the same time this photograph was being taken, Noemie's grandparents and uncle were being gassed in Auschwitz. This is the last photograph of Dieter. He joined the Panzers, where survival rate was something like 5%. This was taken in Christmas 1944. By the beginning of April, having just turned 19, he was killed in Bavaria, outside Würzburg. At the end of March 45, with the Russians descending on Berlin, my grandfather came home and announced that the family were being relocated. The office was being moved to the Alps temporarily. the whole family set off with several other SS families heading south. And they stopped off somewhere on the way, somewhere my grandfather knew very, very well. They stopped at Dachau. My wife and I followed the same route just a few years ago while I was researching the book. I told my dad on the phone that we would be visiting Dachau. By then his dementia had developed, and he was saying things that he wouldn't have said in a guarded moment. And he told me a story that was unbelievable, but for the fact that he said something that made no sense at the time. And it was only when you went to Dachau and saw the layout of the camp that you realized that what he was saying had to be true. This is a tough passage. He told me the family were housed in a barracks hut that had been used for SS troops. Barracks hut with bunks. My dad was sitting on the bunk bed. His parents were at the window, looking at this building, long, low building with a big chimney. His mother said, "You know what they're doing there?" His father said, "No." His mother said, "Well, they're killing them. They're killing the Jews and burning their bodies." His father said, No, they wouldn't do that." His mother said, "Of course they would. Can't you smell the flesh?" By then I knew exactly who my grandfather was. I knew that those business trips to his factories were to concentration camps, to Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen, and all the others, and that his workers were slave laborers. I went to see the archivists at Dachau, very sympathetic men. And I said, is it conceivable that my grandfather could go to all these places of horror and not understand what was happening? And they said, it is impossible. I came out of the archive and I have no recollection of my wife taking this photograph. That's the tough bit. The family left Dachau and we left Dachau at the exact same time of year. It was mid-April and there was snow on the ground. The family went up this valley as we did to the top, and there they stayed in a cabin that had probably been built on my grandfather's orders, a chalet. They sat at the top of the back valley and waited. One day, my dad told me that he watched an American Jeep coming up the track. There were 4 heavily armed men inside. They jumped out. They grabbed my dad's sister. They stuck a gun in her back and said, "Take us to your Nazis." And that was what happened. My father watched as his own father was beaten up a bit, put in a Jeep, driven away, and that was him for the next 3 years. The war had ended the day before. What could the family do but go down to the town where the American occupying army were there? And an American soldier took this photograph. There, my dad wearing his helmet. My uncle Eki wearing a little paper hat that probably one of the soldiers made him. The family no longer had a house in Berlin. They had to go to my grandfather's in-laws in Hameln, a little flat. And there they stayed for the rest of their lives. It's ironic that they were buried in a cemetery opposite Hameln's Jewish cemetery. And all the way researching this story, I took inspiration and courage from a man who still lives in Hameln today. His father had committed atrocities in Poland. His name is Bernhard, He said he could accept what his father had done, but what he couldn't accept was that his father said he would do it again. When Bernhard retired as a history teacher, he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to teaching the children of Hameln and the surrounding villages about the Jewish communities who had lived there before Hitler. And he even convinced their parents to restore the gravestones that had been smashed by the Nazis. The other person who was my inspiration was the little boy in the paper hat, my uncle Ecki, a man who with his wife adopted 2 little girls after Chernobyl, the antithesis of a Nazi. My uncle read the draft of my book with the help of his wife and said to me, "I find this very hard, but it is true, and you must tell this story." And so we have 2 families with a very different attitude to the Holocaust. The wee family in Glasgow who wanted to forget, who wanted to hide. And then Noemie's family who spoke or wrote and have left a legacy for Noemie to follow and for me to very willingly follow with her. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, both of you. Even for the historian's point of view and knowing the facts, it's always hard and quite distressing to hear, almost not in the first place, but from someone that speaks from their own families. And thank you for sharing with us. It was amazing. Sorry, I'm still trying to compose myself. So probably as a first question, and I think it will be for both of you, Derek and Noemie. What means for you, in this case, Noemie, that her family, and she is a descendant of someone who survived the Holocaust, and what means for Derek, who was on the other side of the wall, if we can say that way. What means for you and the impact that this had on your lives?
It impacted me, I presume, already without knowing. I think in the way I've been brought up, a lot of positive, a lot of admiration for my parents, to bring me up without hate. My parents are friends in Germany to this day, and people sought me out on the internet. My parents' friend, a young assistant, a young dentist assistant, she was only an assistant for, I think, not even longer than a year, spoke very highly of my father, a German lady. And I think that's huge credit to my parents, that they went beyond their experiences to find the human person again post-war. How did I grow up in Munich? Maybe more my mother than my father. Might be unfair because I was a kid, and so it's really just what I personally remember was not to draw any attention to myself. So I had to disappear. I was always the smallest in class, so it was easy for me to disappear. But I had to be cleaner than everybody else, quieter than everybody else, more polite than everybody else. And I didn't like being Jewish. It made me feel different. I'm ashamed to admit it, but that's the truth. And I didn't know really about the Holocaust. I learned about it in a non-Jewish Sophie Scholl Gymnasium, in a large non-Jewish school, secondary school of 1,800 pupils, in an ethics lesson. And it's 3 images I remember probably almost immediately from the lesson. I didn't retain much because I was so shocked. And that's what I remember to this day. And then I only read The Long Night very late on in my life, at the age of 36. And that's when I faced the Holocaust. And then it was when I closed the book. I had a choice, really. I would have loved to have gone back. I know this is really childish, never knowing anything about it, never knowing that it was very painful that man can do this to man. And that then I didn't know my mother had it, but that my father endured that, and he lost his younger brother, younger sister. They were murdered in Auschwitz, gassed. His parents who were in their 40s. And I felt that if I closed it, that it's very emotional, that I would suffocate them again. So that's when I embarked on the translation, but I didn't know I would become this passionate, or my family say this obsessed with the Holocaust. So it sort of, it evolved. And it's very much part of my life, and what helps me really, as much as I'm very nervous to speak in front of an audience, and I challenge myself and try and keep my talks fresh every time, it's also very healing and a very positive experience to have people like yourself interested in our stories and, make a better people. It gives me a lot of hope and optimism for a better present and future.
And on your side, Derek?
Initially, because this story had been covered up in the family for such a long time, I would say I was paranoid for a while. And there was a long period when, a 3-year period when I was researching my grandfather's story, wondering what would come up. But actually talking, and especially I think talking with Noemie, I mean, for a start, I'm a professional writer. So I felt that if I'm not prepared to stand up and tell the story that hundreds of thousands of Germans tried to hide, then who does? And having done that, and particularly having linked up with Noemie, to talk to people, as Noemie said, to talk to people like you, and particularly to talk to schools and talk to receptive young minds. And instead of preaching distrust, suspicion, and hatred, offer a vision of tolerance, understanding, and kindness. It gets through to children so well because it's something that empowers them. We really do stress that they have the capacity to stop these things happen. And when we're talking to particularly deprived schools, where children have had a difficult background, to be given this message of hope is just tremendous. So actually, like Noemie, it's difficult to speak. It's quite emotionally challenging, but it's also hugely rewarding if we can just get people to see something different and to come together.
And obviously you have what I think is something very unique in terms of the educating in the campaign about the Holocaust. Usually we hear from obviously survivors or sometimes from people descendant from obviously SS officers, etc. But the union between the two sides, I think is quite remarkable, and I think better than both visions for the audience. There's nothing better than that to really understand the full picture. Derek, if you didn't met your grandfather, correct?
That's right. Yeah, he died before I was born. Yeah,
and obviously the whole story, like you said, it was a cover-up as much as possible. But have you ever understood your parents' position towards the past, let's say?
Well, I know that my mother knew nothing at all, because she has said to me, if I'd known what Karl was, I would not have named your brother after him. My father told little lies, and I think ended up believing them. He told me that we used to tell people that we lived in Munich because if we told them that we lived in Dachau, people would know who we were. I think the most interesting thing about our partnership is how difficult it was for Noemie. And maybe Noemie, maybe you could explain just how viscerally difficult it was for you to start on this.
Was it difficult for you, Derek, or never?
Never difficult.
First of all, Derek is a lovely man. So when we met, we clicked like human being to human being, like you all yourselves have this experience. You either like somebody or you don't, even on the first instance, and then the young ones say reset and reset, or we say in English, don't judge a book by its cover. But even though I say that intellectually, I approached Derek. Derek used to say I stalked him. I found Derek on Facebook under a Jewish site, Aish, and I was the one who came forward. I found it hard because even though I fully understand, like you just asked Derek, that he is the grandson of his grandfather. He never even met his grandfather. Derek is who he is by accident of birth, like I am who I am by accident of birth. I saw Nazi when I met Derek. So my emotion was way behind my intellect. I was very uncomfortable meeting Derek. I told my mother I would meet Derek, telling my mother I wanted her blessing with her past, wondering also I couldn't ask my father. My father died when I was 12. But somehow I knew it was right, and I suppose I knew it was right in the way my parents had brought me up to see man for who he is now. And my mother, as an 87-year-old lady, is currently in Germany, Munich, which she likes. And at Oxford Union a couple of days ago, people said, how can you do it standing next to Derek in a room? And my mother said, for goodness sake, it's not to do with Derek. It's the next generation. How many generations will you hold responsible? So knowing how my mother feels, still it was a journey for me. And I didn't like it when Derek introduced me, even though this is who we are in the talk. I am the Jew and Derek is the Nazi, not. But this is, I think, what the headlines see or what I saw. I didn't like it when Derek introduced me as an Orthodox Jewess, as the other and as different. So as much as I ask of you and your audience to build bridges, we call it now, Derek and I too had to do my own personal walk on the bridge. But for Derek to know this, how I feel, shows how comfortable I am with Derek, that Derek now tells me to say it because I obviously told Derek this. And of course I felt guilty and uncomfortable, but I tell Derek and his dear wife, Sarah, many things about myself now because they've become more than friends, often confidants. So it's a remarkable thing, and it's a beautiful thing because we share the same message. And obviously, when you hear Derek speak, he's nothing. It's the most ridiculous sentiment that I had.
And it is hard. It is hard. We often speak at synagogues, and Noemie is greeted with open arms, and quite often a sizable number of the audience won't even look at me before the talk. Sometimes we're asked to talk together, and the person organizing the talk will email Noemie and ask her to pass on the message to me, as if I might send a swastika down the line to them. But that shows the depth of feeling. I don't condemn people for that. I pity them for being trapped in that state of mind. One lady said to Noemie when we were speaking together, I don't think I can bring myself to speak to a German. And I just felt, when does this end? You don't speak to the Nazi or the Nazi's offspring or their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren. Do you perpetuate these divides for the rest of time? No, of course you don't.
And what you've done, it's amazing. You literally you've break up this wall between the both worlds, let's say, and it's remarkable. I will let Peter, because he has a question as well. Peter.
Thank you very much, Joel. And I'd like to say firstly to both Noemie and Derek, thank you so much to both of you for sharing your stories this evening. Derek, I'd like to ask you a bit about your grandfather, if I may. One thing that really struck me about him was the fact that, I think as you highlighted, he was a very ordinary person who eventually sort of made his way into the Nazi Party and then became increasingly prominent. I'd like to ask, do you have any idea as to why he decided to join the party, and why do you think ordinary people, I suppose more broadly, get drawn into very hateful organizations like that?
We have no evidence of why he joined, except perhaps that the children that he brought up to varying degrees exhibited strong anti-Semitism. So my aunt, who's the eldest of the siblings, was anti-Semitic for the rest of her life. My father, who was the third, because obviously the oldest son died, had a slight ambivalent attitude. His best friend at work was Jewish, but he could still trot out the kind of Nazi, the Jews will take over the world mythology. My uncle, as I'd said earlier, is the antithesis of a Nazi and displays no anti-Semitism. The war was over when he was 7 years old. He didn't go through the Nazi education system. My grandfather, I think, otherwise made decisions that he could justify that benefited him and his family. He joined the SS because this was a steady job. He'd been through periods of unemployment. He knew what economic hardship was. He had a family to support. He could join the SS. He could get a pension. If he was still alive today, he'd still be drawing a pension from Oswald Pohl, who signed his pension document. He had status. He'd come back from the First World War. He'd never really got anywhere in life. And here he was, a captain of the SS, chauffeur-driven car. He had that status. And I think he liked that. And many of the SS did. And he was very patriotic as well. And so he convinced himself that what the state was paying him to do and ordering him to do could be justified on that basis. I don't think he had the imagination. I don't think he had the courage of imagination to really question what he was doing. And that would apply to hundreds of thousands, of course.
Thank you, Derek. I will pass now to Carlos, who has a question for you as well. For you and for Noemie.
Yes, for Derek and Noemie. First of all, I want to say that I admire what you and Noemie do, because you are truly inspiring people to love and forgive. And we live in a world that hate is taking over the place, you know. And I just want to say thank you for that. My question is that recent events in the UK, they have just a second. The rise of the anti-Semitism in the UK is very alarming. We had incidents in May, and my question is: do you find it concerning, or do you think that it's under control? This growth of hate. That's my question.
Noemie, do you want to start?
Yeah, I don't feel it's under control. In fact, in Manchester just last Saturday, at the Shabbat service at the Manchester Reformed Synagogue, the service got interrupted, even though it was online, by I think right-wing extremists. So you're right, anti-Semitism on the rise. And 2018, it didn't help with Mr. Corbyn being in the Labour Party and actually giving permission for anti-Semitic behaviour to be portrayed. And that's it. When we speak in schools, we ask children in whichever way they can, and students, to not be bystanders, to empower all of you to say something. And it's not easy. We accept and admit it's not easy. It takes a huge amount of courage, but it's a lot easier to do in a safe space than it is when we no longer have a democracy. And anti-Semitism is on the rise all over. In America, today is 3 years since the shooting of the Pittsburgh synagogue. We had Trump, the rally. France, Copenhagen, Brussels, too many, sadly. And this is in living memory of Holocaust survivors. And I think because it's such a broad form of hatred, it exists like from our talk, from the far right, it exists in the far left, it exists in jihadi extremism. In the Middle Ages, it was because of religion. In Nazi Germany, the race. Today, it's Israel threatening. There's no problem criticizing Israel like we criticize the government in the UK, but they don't want the existence of Israel, and that is the new form of anti-Semitism, and so on. So it makes me want to educate the world. Will I reach the world? Maybe with you guys through Zoom, I don't know. But so we need education, because I always say we are all inherently prejudiced. We all, if we're very honest, I feel that we're made that way. We don't like difference. So we need to be educated to like difference, and shown how we grow from difference. And I always say, you know what one person can achieve? And if you do big projects, you often get a few people together, and then you build something big and great. And it's teaching people not to be frightened. And social media, encourages through their algorithm to keep us in our echo chambers of what we like and more what we like. They know how we are wired. So it has to be education. We have to educate, and we have to start young.
Thank you very much.
And I would just add the words of the writer Susan Sontag, who said that 10% of people are evil, 10% of people are good, and 80% of people can go either way. So it's critical that the 80% moves in the direction of the good and not the evil. And that needs work.
Definitely. I know we are passing a little bit from our time. I do apologize. We have only just 2 questions to finalize, but I think it's quite important. Luis, do you want to make your question now, please?
Yes. First, it's an emotional story, what the two of you talk about. And very important, because I know from the Holocaust since I was like 9, 10, and many people who I talked to never understand what it was until they grow up, of course. But my question is about our society, the Portuguese society, because it was a country that was not involved in the Second World War directly. And my question is that a few weeks ago, a Portuguese consul was indicated to the National Pantheon of Portugal, and was indicated because he saved a lot of Jews during the Second World War. Was a Portuguese consul in Bordeaux. And my question is that this can be a kick-started conversation or a debate about the Second World War in a society that was not involved directly in the Second World War, or do you think it can be other things? Because In history class, normally in schools in Portugal, the Second World War is taught like, oh, it's a thing that happened, nothing more. And it's not like that. It's a very important moment in human history, in humanity, because of the Holocaust, because it was the greatest war in human history. So what do you think?
I think one way to teach the Holocaust, in particularly if there isn't a particular relevance in, say, in Portugal, is to look at it as an example of genocide. So to give genocide a global perspective and see those commonalities, see the commonalities between the Holocaust in Europe, the genocides in Rwanda, in Myanmar, in China, in all parts of the world. And then I think perhaps that would bring it home more to the children of Portugal, to say this can happen anywhere in the world. Given the wrong conditions, this can be triggered. And so the Holocaust is a very good historical example of the factors that lead to genocide. And to understand the Holocaust is to understand something about human nature and how things can go wrong.
And I would use your example of the man who saved the Jews and start that way, that I'm sure it was not easy at the time to do this, and that he must have risked his life. And to make choices, Derek and I use the same words often, while it's safe to do choices when you live in a democracy, and to make people aware that when people come to power, it's often not only one group that's affected. It knocks onto multiple groups, as Hitler showed, as Stalin showed. It does never just end with the Jews. And when they start with Jews, who after all are, I hate calling it Jews, I call it humans of the Jewish faith, because we're not a different breed. It's humans. It's the breakdown of civilization. It's the beginning of breakdown of democracy. If you don't support one group of civilians, who are you going to go for next in your power struggle? And make people think about it. And the challenge is, as Derek recognizes, how you make people empathize. Young people, why should they care about something that happened 80 years ago? And why should they care about what happened to a bunch of people when they don't belong to the same religion? Maybe it had nothing to do with me, but it has, because it happened to human beings. Are they gone?
Ooh.
Is it just you and me, Derek?
I think we're all here. It's just Zhao's shared his screen. Oh, is this the man? Oh,
maybe
yes.
Oh, very good.
Ah, Luis, I see. Yes,
it's the consul. Yes, it's the
Right.
consul. He finished in poverty because the dictator Salazar
yes.
took his money savings, and he finished in poverty, died in poverty because of what he did in Bordeaux.
Oh,
He got punished.
Yes, by the God.
thank you for sharing that with us.
Has he been made a righteous Gentile by Yad Vashem? Have you?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
It's the biggest tree in the. I think it's a museum, right?
Yes,
Or
Yad Vashem.
Yes, it's the
It's
biggest.
the Holocaust Museum in Israel.
It's
Yeah.
the biggest tree in the garden that exists in the museum.
Sorry, and apparently I was speaking a lot, but I had my micro off. But Louise explained everything anyway. It's just for our viewers to understand who was Louise talking about. Probably I don't think it is the best way to finish our talk by the question that Peter will do now. But before that, just to let our viewers know as well that there's two amazing books, one from Noemie, The Long Night, and one from Derek, Nazi in the Family. And I will leave the link for both books on our YouTube channel as well. I will pass now to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you both, as a final question to conclude our discussion tonight, what's the most important thing that you'd like our viewers to take away from this talk going ahead?
That we're all capable of good and evil. We have it in each of us. That's why we stress that we're all ordinary people, whether it was Hitler, Stalin, Boris Johnson, Madonna, the Janner family, you name it. We all started the same way and we all go the same way. So to recognize that human characteristics don't change. Our technology, our science, it all moves forward, but we are the same like we were hundreds of years ago, and we're capable of the same. So to think before we act. And yes, we certainly can dislike or hate, but we don't have to hurt.
I would agree with that. Act while it is safe to do so. Act on your best instincts and don't give in to your worst instincts.
I liked it when Noemie said how lovely Derek was and vice versa. I think both of you are, and both of you have an amazing story, and both of you are doing a huge difference. At least I want to believe that. And thank you so much for being with us. It is rewarding to be able to speak with you guys about this and to share with our viewers as well. And once again, thank you so much for everything.
And thank you for asking us.
And I say obrigado.
De nada. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who is watching us, and until the next Confabulating. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.